I've earned 30 plus certifications, and I'm here to guide you to success on your exam. Welcome to the Ultimate AZ-140 Exam Masterclass. Are you ready to crack the AZ-140 exam in one go? You're in the right place. In this session, we'll arm you with powerful insights and hand-picked questions that can make all the difference in your exam performance. We've scanned the web using intelligent crawlers to gather the most critical and high-impact questions, all compiled into one powerful PDF resource. You can download it from the link in the description. Not only will we explore these must-practice questions, but we'll also share real exam experiences and pro tips to give you that competitive edge. Let's dive into the key questions that could shape your success. Question 1. You have an Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, tenant named Contoso.com and an Azure Virtual Network named VNet1. To VNet1, you deploy an Azure Active Directory Domain Services, Azure ADDS, managed domain named litwaring.com. To VNet1, you plan to deploy a Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool1. You need to ensure that you can deploy Windows 10 Enterprise Session hosts to Pool1. What should you do first? A. Modify the settings of the litwaring.com DNS zone. B. Modify the DNS settings of VNet1. C. Add a custom domain name to Contoso.com. D. Implement Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync. Correct answer B. Modify the DNS settings of VNet1. Explanation. AVD requires session hosts to resolve the Azure ADDS domain. Updating VNet DNS ensures hosts can join the managed domain. Question 2. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop. The deployment will use existing virtual machines. You create an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool. You need to ensure that you can add the virtual machines to the host pool. What should you do first? A. Register the Microsoft.Desktop virtualization provider. B. Generate a registration key. C. Run the invoke AZVM run command complete. D. Create a role assignment. Correct answer B. Generate a registration key. Explanation. Each host pool requires a registration key to securely add session hosts. Without it, VMs cannot join the pool. Question 3. You are designing an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. You identify the network latency between the locations where users reside and the planned deployment. What should you use to identify the best Azure region to deploy the host pool? A. Azure Traffic Manager. B. Azure Virtual Desktop Experience Estimator. C. Azure Monitor for Azure Virtual Desktop. D. Azure Advisor. Correct answer B. Azure Virtual Desktop Experience Estimator. Explanation. The Experience Estimator tool helps test round-trip latency to Azure regions. This ensures session hosts are placed in the optimal location. Question 4. Your company has 60,000 users. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop. You need to recommend a storage solution for the FSLogix profile containers. The solution must provide the highest possible IPS and the lowest latency desktop experience. What should you recommend? A. Azure Data Lake Storage. B. Azure NetApp Files. C. Azure Blob Storage Premium. D. Azure Files Standard. Correct answer B. Azure NetApp Files. Explanation. Azure NetApp Files delivers enterprise-grade performance with very high IPS and low latency, making it ideal for FSLogix. Question 5. You have an Azure subscription that contains 500 users. The users are assigned Microsoft Office 365 E1 licenses. You deploy an Azure Virtual Desktop solution that contains Windows 10 multi-session hosts and streams a custom remote app named App1. You need to ensure that the users are licensed to stream App1. The solution must minimize costs. Which license should you use? A. Microsoft 365 E5. B. Office 365 E3. C. A Remote Desktop Services (RDS) Client Access License (CAL). D. Windows 10 Enterprise E3. Correct answer D. Windows 10 Enterprise E3. Explanation. AVD requires a Windows 10 Enterprise license for virtualization rights. Windows 10 Enterprise E3 is the lowest cost valid option here. Question 6. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment that contains an Azure Compute Gallery. The Azure Compute Gallery contains an image definition named Definitions. Definition 1 contains the following image versions: 1.0.0, 1.1.0, 1.2.0. You need to ensure that when a virtual machine is created from the Azure Compute Gallery, the 1.1.0 image version is used by default. What should you do? A. Select Exclude from Latest for image version 1.0.0. B. Select Exclude from Latest for image version 1.2.0. C. Apply a lock to image version 1.1.0. D. Apply a tag named Default to image version 1.1.0. Correct answer B. Select Exclude from Latest for image version 1.2.0. Explanation. By excluding the highest version, 1.2.0, from latest, version 1.1.0 becomes the default image for new VM deployments. Question 7. You deploy an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool1. You have an Azure storage account named Store1 that stores FSLogix profile containers in a share named Profiles. You need to configure the path to the storage containers for the session hosts. Which path should you use? A. /store1.blob.core.windows.net/profiles. B. https://store1.file.core.windows.net/profiles. C. /store1.file.core.windows.net/profiles. D. https://store1.blob.core.windows.net/profiles. Correct answer C. /store1.file.core.windows.net/profiles. Explanation. FSLogix requires a UNC path to an Azure Files share, which uses the file.core.windows.net namespace. Question 8. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop Session host virtual machines based on a pre-configured master image. The master image will be stored in a shared image gallery. You create a virtual machine named Image1 to use as the master image. You install applications and apply configuration changes to Image1. You need to ensure that the new session host virtual machines created based on Image1 have unique names and security identifiers. What should you do on Image1 before you add the image to the shared image gallery? A. At a command prompt, run the set computer name command. B. At a command prompt, run the sysprep command. C. From PowerShell, run the rename computer command. D. From the lock screen of the Windows device, perform a Windows autopilot reset. Correct answer B. At a command prompt, run the sysprep command. Explanation. Running sysprep generalizes the VM by removing unique identifiers like SID and hostname, ensuring uniqueness for new VMs. Question 9. Note: this question is part of a series of questions that present the same scenario. Each question in the series contains a unique solution that might meet the stated goals. Some question sets might have more than one correct solution, while others might not have a correct solution. After you answer a question in this section, you will not be able to return to it. As a result, these questions will not appear in the review screen. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool that contains 5 session hosts. The session hosts run Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. You need to prevent users from accessing the Internet from Azure Virtual Desktop sessions. The session hosts must be allowed to access all the required Microsoft services. Solution: you modify the IP configuration of each session host. Does this meet the goal? A. Yes. B. No. Correct answer B. No. Explanation: modifying ipconfig won't block user internet access. You need to use NSGs or firewall rules to restrict outbound internet traffic. Question 10. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop Hosts pool. The pool contains session hosts that run Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. You connect to a remote desktop session on Pool 1 and discover an issue with the frequency of screen updates. You need to identify whether the issue related to insufficient server, network, or client resources. The solution must minimize how long it takes to identify the resource type. What should you do? A. From within the current session, use the Azure Virtual Desktop Experience Estimator. B. From Azure Cloud Shell, run the getAZ Operational Insights Workspace Usage Complet and specify the default profile parameter. C. From Azure Cloud Shell, run the getAZ User Session Complet and specify the user session ID parameter. D. From within the current session, use Performance Monitor to display the values of all the RemoteFX graphics, *, frames skipped / second counters. Correct answer D. From within the current session, use Performance Monitor to display the values of all the RemoteFX graphics, *, frames skipped / second counters. Explanation: RemoteFX counters in Performance Monitor quickly show whether skipped frames are due to server, network, or client limitations. Question 11. You have an Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, tenant named contoso.com. You use a user account named admin1 to deploy an Azure Active Directory domain services, Azure ADDS, managed domain named adscontoso.com to a virtual network named vnet1. You plan to deploy an Azure Virtual Desktop Hosts pool named Pool1 to vnet1. You need to ensure that you can use the admin1 user account to deploy Windows 10 Enterprise session hosts to Pool1. What should you do first? A. Add admin1 to the AADDC administrators group of contoso.com. B. Assign the Cloud Device Administrator role to admin1. C. Assign a Microsoft 365 Enterprise E3 license to admin1. D. Change the password of admin1. Correct answer A. Add admin1 to the AADDC administrators group of contoso.com. Explanation: only members of the AADDC administrators group have permissions to join VMs to the managed domain. Question 12. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop Host pool named Pool1 that contains the following: a linked workspace named Workspace1, an application group named Default Desktop, a session host named Host1. You need to add a new data disk. What should you modify? A. Host1. B. Workspace1. C. Pool1. D. Default Desktop. Correct answer A. Host1. Explanation: adding a new data disk must be done at the VM level. In this case, the session host Host1 must be modified. Question 13. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. You need to create a host pool. The solution must ensure that during periods of low CPU usage, credits can be accumulated, and then used to raise performance above the purchased baseline during periods of high CPU usage. Which virtual machine series should you specify when you create the pool? A. A series. B. D series. C. H series. D. B series. Correct answer D. B series. Explanation: B series VMs support CPU credit bursting, which allows performance above baseline when credits are available. Question 14. You have an Azure Active Directory Domain Services, Azure ADDS, domain named contoso.com. You have an Azure storage account named Storage1. Storage1 hosts a file share named Share1 that has share and file system permissions configured. Share1 is configured to use contoso.com for authentication. You create an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool1. Pool1 contains 2 session hosts that use the Windows 10 Multi-Session plus Microsoft 365 apps image. You need to configure an FSLogix profile container for Pool1. What should you do next? A. Install the FSLogix agent on the session hosts of Pool1. B. From Storage1, set Allow Shared Key Access to Disabled. C. Configure the profiles setting for the session hosts of Pool1. D. Generate a Shared Access Signature (SAS) key for Storage1. Correct answer A. Install the FSLogix agent on the session hosts of Pool1. Explanation: FSLogix must be installed on session hosts to redirect user profiles to Azure files or NetApp shares. Question 15. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. You plan to use FSLogix profile containers. You need to recommend a solution that will be used to store the containers. The solution must meet the following requirements. The containers must be stored on solid-state drives (SSDs). Minimize administrative effort. Minimize cost. What should you recommend? A. Azure NetApp Files. B. Azure Files Standard. C. Azure Blob Storage Premium. D. Azure Files Premium. Correct answer D. Azure Files Premium. Explanation: Azure Files Premium is SSD-backed and provides managed file shares with low latency at lower cost than NetApp files. Question 16. You have an on-premises network and an Azure subscription. The subscription contains the following virtual network. Name: VNet1. Address space: 10.10.0.0/16. Subnet name: Subnet1. Subnet 1 address range: 10.10.0.0/16. You deploy an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool that contains 10 session hosts to Subnet 1. You plan to deploy a VPN gateway to VNet 1 and provide the session hosts with access to the on-premises network. You need to ensure that you can deploy the VPN gateway. What should you do first? A. Modify the address range of Subnet 1. B. Add a subnet named Gateway Subnet to VNet 1. C. Modify the address space of VNet 1. D. Associate a network security group, NSG, to Subnet 1. Correct answer B. Add a subnet named Gateway Subnet to VNet 1. Explanation: a VPN gateway requires a dedicated subnet named Gateway Subnet in the virtual network before deployment. Question 17. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop. You are deploying storage spaces direct to a cluster that will store FSLogix profile containers. The cluster will not use Cloud Witness. What is the minimum number of virtual machines required for the cluster? A1. B2. C3. D4. Correct answer C. 3. Explanation: without Cloud Witness, storage spaces direct needs at least 3 nodes to maintain quorum and high availability. Question 18. Which settings should you modify for VNet 4 before you can deploy Pool 4? A. Service endpoints. B. Address space. C. DNS servers. D. Access control IAM. E. Peerings. Correct answer C. DNS servers. Explanation: Azure Virtual Desktop requires proper DNS resolution of the domain. Updating DNS servers ensures hosts can join the domain. Question 19. You plan to implement the FSLogix profile containers for the Seattle office. Which storage account should you use? A. Storage 2. B. Storage 4. C. Storage 3. D. Storage 1. Correct answer D. Storage 1. Explanation. FS Logics requires a supported Azure Files or Premium Capable Storage account. In this scenario, Storage 1 meets the requirements. Question 20. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. You plan to implement FS Logics profiles for the deployment. You need to configure NTFS permissions for the file share that will store the FS Logics profiles. The solution must follow the principle of least privilege. At which level should you apply permissions for creator-owner? A. This folder, subfolders and files. B. Subfolders and files only. C. This folder only. D. Files only. Correct answer A. This folder, subfolders and files. Explanation. FS Logics requires creator-owner to have permissions applied at this folder, subfolders and files to ensure correct user profile creation. Question 21. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment that contains a host pool named Pool1. Pool1 contains a session host named Host1 that is Azure AD joined. You need to verify whether a Windows license is assigned to Host1. What should you do? A. From the Azure Active Directory Admin Center, view the product licenses. B. From VM1, run the Get Windows Developer License Complete. C. From the Azure portal, view the properties of Host1. D. From Azure Cloud Shell, run the Get AZ-VM Complete. Correct answer D. From Azure Cloud Shell, run the Get AZ-VM Complete. Explanation. Get AZ-VM exposes the VM's license type / licensing info for verification. Checking Azure AD licenses won't show the VM's OS licensing state. Question 22. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool1. All the session hosts in Pool1 are Microsoft Entra joined. Users connect to Pool1 by using macOS devices. You need to ensure that remote users can authenticate to remote app sessions by using their Microsoft Entra credentials. Which RDP property should you configure? A. Targetus adjoined I1. B. Enabler status I1. C. Authentication level I1. D. Prompt credentialants I0. Correct answer A. Targetus adjoined I1. Explanation. Targetus adjoined I1 enables Microsoft Entra, Azure AD, authentication for AVD to Entra joined hosts. It's required for non-Windows clients like macOS. Question 23. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment that contains a host pool named Pool11. You plan to use a custom image template to create session hosts for Pool1. You need to create the custom image template. What should you create first? A. A user-assigned managed identity. B. An Azure automation account. C. An FS Logics profile container. D. A workbook. Correct answer A. A user-assigned managed identity. Explanation. Azure VM Image Builder uses a user-assigned managed identity to access source images and write outputs. It's a prerequisite for the template. Question 24. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment that contains a host pool named Pool1. All the session hosts in Pool are Microsoft Entra joined. You have 50 users that will access the deployment by using devices that run Linux. You need to ensure that the users can sign into the deployment. Which custom RDP property should you configure? A. Targetus adjoined. B. Enable credits support. C. Security mode. D. Authentication level. Correct answer A. Targetus adjoined. Explanation. Setting Targetus adjoined tells the client the host is Entra joined, enabling Entra authentication for Linux clients. Without it, sign-in will fail. Question 25. You have an Azure subscription. You need to deploy an Azure Virtual Desktop Host pool that will contain 20 Windows 11 session hosts. The solution must meet the following requirements. Each session host must have a Windows client license applied. Administrative effort must be minimized. What should you use to deploy the session hosts? A. The Azure portal. B. Microsoft Intune. C. Windows Autopilot. D. An Azure Automation Runbook. Correct answer A. The Azure portal. Explanation. The AVD wizard in the Azure portal streamlines deployment and applies the required Windows client licensing. It's the lowest effort built-in method. Question 26. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment that contains a host pool named Pool 1. Pool 1 contains 2 session hosts. You create a new virtual machine named Host 3 that runs Windows 11. You need to add Host 3 as a third session host to Pool 1. What should you do first? A. Generate a registration key. B. Assign a scaling plan to Pool 1. C. Generate a certificate for Host 3. D. Deallocate the existing session hosts. Correct answer A. Generate a registration key. Explanation. A registration key is required to join any new VM to an AVD host pool. Without it, Host 3 cannot be registered with Pool 1. Question 27. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop session host named Host 1. You need to check the status of Microsoft Defender antivirus on Host 1. Which PowerShell command should you run? A. Get DSC configuration status. B. Get MP computer status. C. Get KDS configuration. D. Get BC status. Correct answer B. Get MP computer status. Explanation. Get MP computer status retrieves the health and status of Microsoft Defender antivirus, including signature and protection state. Question 28. You have an Azure subscription that contains an 8-node storage spaces direct cluster named Cluster 1 and an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool 1. The session hosts and pools store FSLogix user profiles in Cluster 1. You are evaluating the availability of the user profiles in Pool 1. What is the maximum number of nodes that can fail at the same time without users losing access to their user profiles? A. 2. B. 3. C. 4. D. 5. Correct answer, C. 4. Explanation. An 8-node storage spaces direct cluster can tolerate up to 4 simultaneous node failures without losing quorum or access to data. Question 29. You have an Azure subscription. You create an Azure Resource Manager, ARM, template named avd.json that defines an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. You need to use PowerShell to provision the deployment by using avd.json. Which PowerShell command should you use? A. New AZWVD host pool. B. New AZ resource. C. New AZWVD registration info. D. New AZ resource group deployment. Correct answer D. New AZ resource group deployment. Explanation. New AZ resource group deployment is the correct command to deploy resources defined in an ARM template like avd.json. Question 30. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. You have a custom virtual machine image named Image1. You need to use Azure VM Image Builder to update Image1. What should you do first? A. Register the Microsoft.Desktop Virtualization Resource Provider. B. Create an Azure Storage account. C. Create an Azure Compute Gallery. D. Register the Microsoft.Virtual Machine Images Resource Provider. Correct answer D. Register the Microsoft.Virtual Machine Images Resource Provider. Explanation. Azure VM Image Builder requires the Microsoft Virtual Machine Images provider to be registered before use. Please revise full PDF 2 to 3 times for 100% success. Check the description for the PDF download link and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for upcoming episodes. Thank you.